welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into Black history and identity in America. We've got three really interesting YouTube videos lined up to kind of unpack, and each one offers like a very different perspective on this topic, which, as we know, is very complex and multifaceted.
Yeah, I think these sources are really fascinating because they really challenge the conventional narratives that we often hear about these topics. They encourage us to think critically about how history is presented and who benefits from those narratives.
For sure. The first video that we're going to be looking at here is by a YouTuber who calls himself Brooklyn St. Mickle. Have you heard of him?
I have, yeah.
Okay, cool. So he's diving into this book, Black Bourgeoisie by E. Franklin Frazier. I actually hadn't heard of this book until I saw the video, but it focuses on the black middle class in the 1950s. And get this, Frazier actually observed that this group often prioritized recreation and status over their careers. Yeah, he even knew a doctor who cared more about his baseball team winning than the life of a patient.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty crazy, right?
That's a striking observation, isn't it? It really makes you wonder if this focus on recreation was maybe a way of escaping the realities of racism and segregation at the time.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a way to find achievement and recognition in areas where they faced fewer limitations.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like they created their own world where success was defined on their own terms, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And Frazier also noticed the fear of competing with white Americans, leading many to prefer the security of segregated communities and professions.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense when you consider the historical context. Systemic racism, limited opportunities, it all would have definitely contributed to a sense of self-preservation. I don't think it was necessarily a lack of ambition, but more like a rational response to the barriers they faced.
Totally. So rather than risking failure in a system that's totally rigged against them, they chose to sell within their own communities. It makes you think about how much societal structures can influence individual choices.
Absolutely. And Frazier even suggests there was a prevalent cultural acceptance of female dominance in these middle-class black households.
Okay.
Which he thinks may have led to submissive men and kind of frustrated relationships.
Wow. That's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah, it is. And it raises important questions about the psychological impact of living in a society that, constantly undermined black men's authority and economic power. We really have to consider the complex dynamics at play here, recognizing that this isn't about assigning blame, but rather understanding the nuances of history.
Right. And this is where Mikel brings in the idea of black consciousness, which he believes can actually be self-defeating.
Right.
So for those who maybe aren't familiar with that term, black consciousness refers to a set of internalized beliefs that are, shaped by generations of oppression. And this mindset can sometimes limit potential and perpetuate cycles of self-doubt, almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, based on these limited expectations.
Yeah.
It's like in internalizing the negative messages you've been given and then letting them kind of define your reality. And while Frazier was specifically looking at the 1950s, Mikel argues that these patterns can continue if this mindset isn't actively challenged. He even goes so far as to say that true progress requires rejecting the label of black altogether.
That's a very provocative statement. It makes you kind of question the role of labels and identity in shaping our self-perception and how society views us. But it also makes you think about what the potential downsides of rejecting such a label might be.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to think about. And it really highlights the complexities of black identity and how it's been shaped by these, larger historical forces.
Yeah. It also reminds us that there's no single universal, quote-unquote, black experience. There's a wide range of perspectives and viewpoints within the black community, and we need to be mindful of that diversity.
Totally. Okay, so the second video we're exploring takes a look at the impact of the U.S. welfare system on black families. It's a documentary from Black Culture Unlocked, and it argues that these programs, even though they were well-intentioned, they might have actually had some unintended negative consequences.
Yeah, I mean, this is a sensitive and complex topic for sure. And the documentary raises important questions about the potential pitfalls of social policies. While these programs aim to provide support, they may have unintentionally created dependencies and maybe had some unforeseen effects on family structures.
For sure. One example they really focus on is the Aid to Families with Dependent Children program, also known as AFDC. This program was originally, I guess, designed to help widowed mothers, but it was later expanded to include single mothers. However, they had this man in the house rule, meaning that families could lose benefits if a man was living with them, even if he wasn't the father.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. That rule definitely would have created a disincentive for marriage and father involvement, right?
Totally.
It kind of placed families in this difficult situation where they were sometimes, better off financially if the father wasn't present.
Exactly. And the documentary points out that between 1960 and 1988, there was a dramatic rise in Black children living in fatherless homes. And they suggest a link between this trend and the expansion of welfare programs in the 1960s.
It's important to remember, though, that correlation doesn't always equal causation. While the documentary presents a thought-provoking argument, it's crucial to consider the broader context. The 1960s was a time of significant social and economic upheaval, right?
Right.
Civil rights legislation was challenging segregation, but those economic disparities, they remained.
So you're saying that while welfare might have played a role, we can't ignore the other factors at play, like persistent discrimination in the job market or, ongoing cultural shifts?
Exactly. The breakdown of family structures is a multifaceted issue. It has no simple explanation. The documentary's perspective is valuable, but it's important to consider alternative viewpoints and avoid oversimplification.
For sure. It definitely raises a lot of questions about how social policies, even those designed to help, can have unintended consequences.
Yeah, it does.
Makes you think about the importance of constantly evaluating and adapting these programs, to make sure they're truly serving their intended purpose without causing unintended harm.
Absolutely. We need to be willing to learn from the past and make adjustments to create more effective and equitable solutions for the future.
Okay, now get ready for this. Our final video takes us in a completely different direction. This one is from the Black History Archives, and it lays out a pretty controversial theory about the ancestry of Black Americans.
Okay.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. This video claims that a significant portion of Black Americans might actually have Native American ancestry.
Wow.
Yeah. And they argue this is due to a largely forgotten history of Native American enslavement and the subsequent intermarriage with African slaves.
That's really fascinating. It challenges like the dominant narrative, right, that links Black American ancestry solely to the transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah.
And while this theory, isn't widely accepted in mainstream historical circles, it raises important questions about the complexities of racial categorization throughout American history.
It really makes you kind of rethink that whole concept of race, right? And how fluid those categories have been throughout history.
Absolutely. And you know what? The video presents some really intriguing historical evidence to support its claims.
Oh, like what?
Well, they point to the existence of historical records that actually document a Native American slave trade. And this trade actually predates the transatlantic slave trade.
Really?
Yeah. They also discuss the presence of Black Indian communities, which were formed through intermarriage and kind of shared experiences of displacement. This suggests, a more interwoven history than is often acknowledged.
It's like uncovering this hidden chapter of history, right?
Yeah, exactly.
One that reveals a deeper and more nuanced understanding of the relationships between different racial and ethnic groups.
Exactly. And the video even mentions works like Ivan Van Sertima's They Came Before Columbus. Have you heard of that one?
I have, yeah.
And the research of Dr. David Imhotep, both of which explore the African presence in ancient America. Now, these alternative historical narratives, they often, face pushback from the established academic institutions, but that doesn't automatically invalidate their perspectives.
Right. So it's more about encouraging a healthy skepticism, right? And exploring different interpretations of the past, even if they challenge what's considered, conventional wisdom.
Exactly. History is rarely a simple, straightforward story. It's about examining multiple perspectives and engaging in this thoughtful dialogue.
It all ties back to our earlier discussions about challenging narratives and being critical thinkers, right?
Absolutely. These videos really encourage us to question what we think we know and to consider a wider range of possibilities.
It's been fascinating to kind of dive into these different perspectives. So far, we've heard arguments about how Black identity has been shaped by, both external forces like societal structures, right? But also internal beliefs, like that idea of Black consciousness. We also looked at how well-intentioned social policies can sometimes have unintended consequences. And now we're kind of grappling with this idea that the history of Black Americans might be more interwoven with Native American history than we realize.
It's a lot to absorb, but these are crucial conversations to have, I think. They make us kind of rethink those assumptions about race and culture and belonging in America.
And you know what's amazing? This is just the beginning. We've got even more to uncover as you continue this deep dive.
I'm excited. Yeah, it's fascinating to consider how these different pieces of the puzzle kind of fit together. Like each video offers such a unique perspective, and when you combine them, you really start to see a much more intricate picture of Black history and identity.
Right? It's like we're peeling back layers and uncovering new complexities with every single video. It's making me realize how much there still is to learn, and how important it is to stay open to different viewpoints.
Absolutely, and I think this final video with its theory about Native American ancestry really highlights that point. One detail that stood out to me was their argument that historical records were sometimes like manipulated to erase or downplay this connection.
Oh yeah, they were talking about how some records might have been changed to classify mixed race individuals as just like Black without even acknowledging their Native American heritage.
Right, exactly.
That's pretty unsettling.
It is, and it speaks to a larger issue of historical revisionism, where the dominant narrative often serves to, reinforce existing power structures.
Hmm.
If you control how history is told, you can kind of influence how people see themselves and the world around them.
Yeah. It's almost like silencing a part of someone's story just to fit a particular narrative. It makes you wonder how many other historical truths have been like buried or distorted over time.
It's a good reminder to be cautious about accepting any single historical account as like the absolute truth. We need to approach history with a critical eye, seeking out multiple perspectives, and always being willing to question what we think we know.
While this theory about Native American ancestry is fascinating, it did make me wonder why it isn't more widely known or accepted. If there is historical evidence to support it.
That's a great question. The video actually suggests that there might have been deliberate efforts to suppress this part of history. They point to the possibility that acknowledging the extent of Native American displacement and the mixing of races could lead to like uncomfortable conversations about reparations or land rights.
Oh, I see. So it's almost like some people might have had a vested interest in imitating a certain version of history, even if it wasn't entirely accurate. It makes you realize how power dynamics can shape the way that information is shared and controlled.
Precisely. And it's a reminder that we should always consider who benefits from a particular narrative and who might be marginalized or silenced in the process.
It's like that saying, history is written by the victors. But by like digging deeper and seeking out those silenced voices, we can get a more complete and truthful understanding of the past.
Exactly. And it's not just about, rewriting the history books. It's about understanding how those historical narratives continue to shape our present and influence the future.
Right. For example, if a significant portion of Black Americans do have Native American ancestry, that could have like profound implications for how they view their own identity and cultural heritage.
Absolutely. It adds another layer of complexity to their story, connecting them to a rich and often overlooked history of indigenous peoples in America. It could lead to a reassessment of cultural practices, a deeper connection to indigenous traditions, and even, potential claims to tribal affiliation.
It's almost like redefining what it means to be Black in America, like expanding the boundaries of identity and recognizing the interconnectedness of different racial and ethnic groups.
Exactly. It challenges like the very notion of these fixed racial categories and highlights the the fluidity and interconnectedness of different ethnicities throughout history. It's a reminder that those categories are often, arbitrary and subject to change, shaped by social and political forces rather than, biological realities.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how much of our understanding of race is based on social constructs rather than scientific fact. And yet these constructs continue to have a very real impact on people's lives.
That's right. The concept of race, as we understand it today, is actually relatively recent. It was shaped by, colonialism, slavery, and that desire to maintain these power structures. And despite scientific evidence showing that there's actually more genetic variation within racial groups than between them, the idea of race as a biological reality still persists.
It's a powerful example of how social conditioning and deeply ingrained beliefs can sometimes override even scientific evidence.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that we all have, biases and preconceptions that are shaped by our upbringing, our education, and the messages we've been exposed to throughout our lives. The key is to be aware of those biases and to be willing to challenge them.
So what does all this mean for the listener? Why should they care about these alternative perspectives on Black history and identity?
Well, history isn't just about the past. It shapes our present and influences our future. By understanding the complexities of Black history and identity, we can better understand the challenges and opportunities facing Black community today.
It's about recognizing the ongoing legacy of racism and discrimination while also appreciating the resilience and the cultural richness of Black people throughout history.
Exactly. It's about understanding how historical narratives continue to impact, social policies, economic opportunities, and even personal interactions. By engaging with these complex histories, we can work toward a more just and equitable future for everyone.
It's about acknowledging that shared humanity that connects us all, regardless of race or ethnicity or any other artificial category.
And it's about being willing to challenge our own biases and assumptions, even when it's uncomfortable. True progress requires critical thinking, empathy, and a willingness to learn and grow.
It's about having those tough conversations and being open to different perspectives.
Right. And these videos have provided us with a lot to think about. We've seen how those external forces like social policies and internal beliefs like Black consciousness have shaped Black identity. We've also been challenged to reconsider that historical narrative and explore the possibility of deeper connections between Black and Native American communities.
We've learned that history is rarely black and white, and that there's always more to the story than we might initially realize.
Exactly. And as we continue to delve into these complex and fascinating topics, it's important to remember that journey of discovery is ongoing.
There's always more to learn, more to question, and more to understand.
And as you, the listener, continue your own exploration of Black history and identity, we encourage you to share your insights and keep the conversation going.
These are conversations that need to be had, and the more perspectives we bring to the table, the richer our understanding will be. So let's continue this deep dive. Where do we go from here? As we've been kind of exploring these different facets of Black history and identity, it's become increasingly clear to me that there's so much more nuance to these topics than meets the eye.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like we've been gradually zooming out, right? Starting with a very specific community in the 1950s and then expanding to look at social policies and their impact. And now we're considering this alternative historical narrative that connects Black Americans to Native American ancestry.
Right. And I think that wider lens is actually a great segue into something that you mentioned earlier, that theory that all modern humans originated in Africa.
Oh, right.
That's a pretty mind-blowing concept, isn't it?
It really is. And when you think about it in the context of all our discussions about race, it throws that whole idea of distinct biological races into question. If we all ultimately trace our ancestry back to the same continent, those differences we see between groups today, well, they become variations that emerged as humans migrated and adapted to different environments.
So essentially, like, we're all part of the same um, family tree, just different branches that have developed, unique characteristics over time.
Precisely. And yet, despite the scientific evidence that supports this idea of interconnectedness, the concept of race as this like rigid biological category, it continues to persist.
It really shows how powerful social conditioning can be. Like, we've internalized these categories and used them to create, hierarchies and systems of oppression, even though they don't actually hold up to scientific scrutiny.
It's a reminder that we need to constantly, question our assumptions and be willing to challenge the narratives we've been taught, especially when those narratives have been used to justify discrimination and inequality.
Yeah, and we've kind of touched on this throughout our deep dive, but it's worth reiterating, I think. Race, as we understand it today, is largely a social construct. It's a way of categorizing people based on, superficial differences that have been given meaning and significance by those in power.
Exactly. And the fact that, this concept of race emerged during those periods of colonialism and slavery should give us pause. The categories were created and used to justify the exploitation and oppression of entire groups of people.
Right. It's like those in power needed a way to kind of differentiate themselves and legitimize their actions. So they created this system of racial categorization that benefited them while disenfranchising others.
And unfortunately, even though we've made progress in challenging these systems, that legacy of that history, it continues to impact us today. We see it in the ongoing struggles for equality and justice, and we see it in the persistence of racial biases and stereotypes.
It's a sobering reminder that even though science doesn't support this idea of distinct biological races, the social and political consequences of that construct are very real.
Which is why, it's so important to have these conversations and to challenge the ways we think about race and identity. The more we understand the historical context and the power dynamics that shaped these categories, the better equipped we are to dismantle them and build a more equitable future.
It's about recognizing our shared humanity and understanding that our differences don't make us inferior or superior. They just make us unique.
And it's about, acknowledging those complexities of history and the ongoing need to learn, unlearn, and relearn as we strive to create a more just and inclusive society.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a few key takeaways here. First, race is a social construct. It's not a biological reality. It's a system that was created to, divide and control, and we need to be aware of its history and its ongoing impact.
Second, history is often told from the perspective of those in power. It's important to seek out those alternative narratives, to amplify the voices of those who have been, marginalized, and to be open to challenging conventional wisdom.
And finally, understanding those complexities of Black history and identity can be a really powerful tool for challenging racism, promoting equality, and fostering a sense of shared humanity. It's about recognizing the resilience and the cultural richness of Black communities, while also acknowledging those systemic barriers and the injustices that they've faced.
It's been an incredible journey exploring these ideas with you, and I really hope that this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and encouraged you to continue learning and questioning.
Remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about ourselves and each other and the world around us, the better equipped we are to create positive change.
So keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Black history and identity. We'll see you next time for another exploration of the ideas that shape our world.